Morning people, welcome back to F Politics. Now after the video that I'm about to show you, it's going to be obvious to all of you that Nigel Farage is a pile of racist, bigoted garbage that has no place in the 21st century. And while I'm going to talk about that, that's not the point of this video. My point is, why is he on our screens? Why is Sky News choosing to platform him? Because you're going to see Trevor Philips grapple with the fact that he can see that he's clearly got a racist bigot in front of him. But Nigel Farage being far right is not new to anybody, definitely not to Sky News. So they don't get to pretend to be surprised when he says some racist, bigoted stuff. They chose him.
We have a growing number of young people in this country who do not subscribe to British values, in fact, loathe much of what we stand for. So what do you do?
Who are we talking about there?
Oh, I think we see them on the streets of London every Saturday.
What do they look like? Oh, we're talking about...
What do they look like?
Are we talking...
First off, I love how Nigel Farage goes, oh, what do they look like? Like he's thinking, oh my god, he's just brought race into it and I didn't even have to. But then Trevor Philips just drives him home, almost as if he knew all along where this was going.
Are we talking about Muslims here?
We are.
Okay, so he's overtly saying that he was talking about Muslims in general when he said that they
do not subscribe to British values, in fact, loathe much of what we stand for.
Okay, so he's overtly saying that Muslims do not subscribe to British values and loathe everything this country stands for. Does that feel a little bit like hate speech to you? But here's how he justifies that.
And I'm afraid I found some of the recent surveys saying that 46% of British Muslims support Hamas, support a terrorist organisation.
Now I looked up that survey. It was done by the Henry Jackson Society, a right-wing think tank. And you're probably thinking, oh, Femi's just calling it right-wing in order to discredit its findings. But I don't have to, because the survey itself is split into two parts. British Muslims on one side, and then everybody else on the other. So you have to ask yourself, what is the agenda of an organisation that goes out specifically to separate out British Muslims from the rest of society? But let's look at the findings themselves, because you just heard Nigel Farage say that 46% of British Muslims support Hamas. But the question the survey asked wasn't, do you support Hamas? It's, who do you empathise with more, Israel or Hamas? And given that binary choice, given that in the last 7 months Hamas has killed 1,200 people, but the Israeli government have killed 35,000 people, trying to imply that British Muslims are terrorist sympathizers simply because they lean away from the Israeli government, who the United Nations says is probably committing genocide, feels again a little bit like hate speech. It's also worth mentioning that since the 1980s, about 87% of the people who've been killed in the fighting between Israel and Palestine were Palestinian. And if you're going to argue that if the choice is between Hamas, who've killed civilians, and the Israeli government, who've killed civilians, then if you're asked who do you feel more empathy towards, the answer should be neither of the above. Well, guess what? British Muslims were actually more likely to choose that answer than the general public. And let's be really real about this. British Muslims are more likely to know people or have family who are currently victims to the genocide in Gaza. So just like on any issue, you're going to find different polling results among the people that are directly affected by it, which is precisely what the Henry Jackson Society and Nigel Farage are seeking to exploit. But for now, let's look at how Trevor Philips, aka Sky News, responds to this far-right rhetoric.
Well, this is very interesting, and we don't have that survey in front of us.
He's saying that he can't disprove Nigel Farage's survey because he hasn't seen it. And to be fair, I had time to go away and find that survey, whereas he can't do that in real time. But this is the problem with bringing on people like Nigel Farage, because you should expect them to bring up racist conspiracy theories and dog-whistling propaganda. That's precisely why he shouldn't be given a platform like this on national TV.
Are you sure you want to make the blanket accusation that you've just made that Muslims are somehow less patriotic than other British people, because those people on those demonstrations are British?
Notice how he's not condemning that rhetoric, he's simply paraphrasing it, like it's a legitimate viewpoint to be expressed on national TV.
And the marches, there were some on those marches. Equally, there were lots of upper middle class girls called Jocasta on those marches as well, and I understand that.
He just ticks so many bigotry boxes with that comment. For starters, the majority of the women on those protests will be adults, and yet he's calling them girls, being patronizing towards them, like calling them Jocasta, implying that they're upper middle class and have no idea how the real world works. Even though Nigel Farage himself is a multi-millionaire ex-banker whose policies have consistently hurt working class people. And despite the fact that the overwhelming majority of the British public oppose what Israel's doing, he's pushing the narrative that it's just Muslims and rich white girls.
This Prime Minister is building up far more of that population than anybody before in history. But nobody in history has allowed more people in who are potentially going to fight against British values than Mr. Sunak.
Again pushing the idea that it's the brown Prime Minister with the Asian name that is deliberately growing the brown population and that that's a threat to the UK. This isn't dog whistling anymore, this is waving a juicy far-right bone in the air and screaming. And again, Sky News can see that.
Is this the thrust of the reform campaign, that actually immigration means that our values are threatened, and particularly we are unhappy about Muslims? Because that is a pretty incendiary proposition.
Calling him incendiary is not condemnation. It's not saying that it's wrong. Because I say stuff that the far right find incendiary all the time, but my agenda is pushing towards equality and human rights. He's explicitly attacking Muslims. So if there was any decency in Sky News, they would simply call him out as a bigot, end the interview, and never invite him back again. Instead, they allow him to cause division from a new angle.
You think about West Indian immigration into Britain, the post-World War II.
I think of very little else.
West Indian immigration into Britain post-World War II. You know, there were a lot of shared things there. Shared history, shared culture, shared religion in many cases. Most families that came could say one of their family had served with British forces in World War I, World War II, love of cricket, you know, the list goes on.
And again, Trevor Philips knows why that's wrong.
Trying to say to me, you know, actually you guys are not really like these other guys. I mean, you and I have known each other a long time. Can you imagine how offensive that is to a British Muslim?
Yes, you have known each other for a long time. This is clearly just a chat between old pals. You've known each other since he stood in front of a poster that tried to use brown faces to scare people about European migration. And just so we're clear, the reason why that breaking poster was racist is because the UK, unlike other EU countries, wasn't under the EU's common asylum policy. So none of the people in that photograph had any rights to enter the UK under EU law. The only way those people could get to the UK, in theory, is if they entered a country like Germany, stayed there for 7 years, applied for German citizenship, at which point they'd have to speak German fluently, enough to classify as a German citizen, and then used EU free movement rights to come to the UK, at which point the only relevance of that photo would be, look at their ethnic origin. And he doubled down on that poster within the last year when he was on I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here. So they know exactly who Nigel Farage is, but they keep inviting him back. And you might be thinking, oh, but Sky News is just inviting him on. It's not their responsibility what he says when he's there. Put it this way. If I hired Lucy Letby today as a nurse, or I hired Chris Brown to run a women's shelter, or I hired Prince Andrew and Drake to be high school teachers, you would hold me responsible for what happens, right? Well, these news companies, they know exactly who people like Nigel Farage are. Nigel Farage is on Question Time so often he's basically part of the furniture. So these news organizations are simply choosing to put out far-right propaganda to the country. I'm Femi. Make sure you follow F Politics at Politics as an FU. Have a great week.